Well, if we take a look at the impact of the coronavirus ahead of us, higher unemployment, mortgage stress and a fall in house prices, that's the prediction from consultancy firm Digital Finance Analytics as Australia deals with months of fallout from the virus. It comes as the government warns of an economic downturn, and the ACTU calls for help for casual workers whose jobs are on the line as the virus causes the retail and hospitality sectors to shrink. Martin North is founder and principal of Digital Finance Analytics and joins us now. Good morning. Thank you for your time.
Hello, Sandy.
You're predicting a fairly grim outlook for our economy. Let's start with the future of casual workers. What's your expectation?
Yeah, well, we know that there's more than 2 million people who are in direct casual work and another 2 million who are self-employed. So that's more than 4 to 4.5 million households and individuals who essentially have no support. In other words, if they stop working, they don't have any health cover and they don't have any holiday cover. And so those people are going to be absolutely on the front line. And unfortunately, a lot of those are younger people. They're in lower paid jobs, and they're in particularly aligned to industries like transportation and the holiday industry and retail. So that's going to be a major issue. Many of them are also rent. And of course, then the interesting question is, if they can't pay the rent, what happens?
Well, exactly. What happens to those who do rent and can't pay, and also people, Martin, who have mortgages and perhaps are in the same category?
Well, yes, we already know in Australia, based on our modelling surveys, that around 32% of households with a mortgage have difficulties. That's more than 1 million. But my modelling suggests if it plays out like the way we think it's going to play out over the next 6 months, by August, that could go up to about 38 or 39%. So that's another 200,000 households with a cash flow problem. And that's what I think we need to understand. This is a cash flow problem because effectively money is not coming in. They've got commitments, and then the question is what happens to that mortgage commitment or that rent commitment. It's interesting, in the UK, the government over there has announced they're actually supporting mortgage repayments for 3 months, and indeed they've actually done stuff now in the rental sector to stop landlords foreclosing on renters for 3 months. I think it's that serious. We're going to need some very different and distinctive policies here, I think, to support those directly, because it's about cash flow more than anything else. And by the way, around 25% of all households in Australia have less than 1 month buffer. So in other words, if things go wrong for a month, they are in immediate financial difficulty. Is
there a role here then for the banks to play? There are suggestions this morning the big banks are negotiating a multi-billion-dollar rescue package with the federal government. Is that something that the banks should step in and help with?
Well, there's no doubt that the banks have a big role to play here. And let's face it, they have benefited from 30 years of astronomical growth in house prices and lending, particularly for mortgages. They've been very generous with their lending standards for a long, long time on the assumption that nothing can ever go wrong in the economy and everything will be fine. Now we're finding it's not. So I do think they have a role to play. I guess the other concern I have is that there's a moral hazard here, because if effectively the government supports the banks and keeps them ticking over, despite the fact that households are under pressure, does it mean that effectively the banks are getting away with poor lending practices that we saw through the Royal Commission and frankly still exist?
Indeed, and that's a debate that we won't go into just here, but I'm thinking about house prices too. What do you expect will happen to them?
Well, I've done some modelling on that, and look, this is, who knows what's going to happen, but let's assume this thing goes on for at least 6 months. Let's hope it's not 18 months like some are saying. My expectation is that on average we're going to see home prices down. It's going to vary a bit by different locations, but I think a 30 to 40% average drop in home prices from the current levels is what I'm expecting. We're going to see that specifically in some of the East Coast areas where we've had very significant rises recently, probably less in the West where prices are already 21% off peak. But I'm also concerned that some of the people that have bought in recently, for example, some of those first-home buyers that were attracted by the government scheme, are really going to be trapped because they've got this very high-priced property just moving into, and now the mortgage is under threat. So home price is definitely down. This is going to be very important to understand because on a long-term basis, our prices of houses are 40% over long-term averages. So it will only be coming back to a long-term average.
Well, Martin, you mentioned the fact that this could go on for 6 months, although there are some predictions it could be as long as 18 months. Let's take a look at the recovery, whenever that may come. How long does it take for an economy to recover from the sort of hit that you're outlining?
Well, I've done some modelling on that, and this is not going to be a V-shaped thing, or it's going to take a long, long time because effectively there's going to be so much disruption. There'll be a number of businesses who will have disappeared. There'll be a number of people who won't be able to get jobs immediately. Companies will be very nervous, I think, about hiring on the other side. So typically this would take 18 months to 2 years to be able to begin to put the trajectory back to where it should be. But of course, in that time, we'll have built the debt pile. Government debt will be much higher. Household debt will be under pressure. So this actually could be, frankly, it could be a generation or so before we see this shaken out the economy.
Tough times ahead, Martin. Look, thank you for joining us.
Good to talk to you.
Martin North there, founder and principal of Digital Finance Analytics.